Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 346, Social Psychology, and today we're going to be talking about social cognition. So most of you are probably familiar with social psychology, most of you are probably also familiar with cognitive psychology. But what is social cognition? Well, social cognition is when we think about and make sense of our social environment. How do we think about our interactions with other people? How do we select, interpret, analyze, remember, and use information about the social world? Borrows a lot from cognitive psychology, which if you've taken cognitive psychology, some of this might be familiar, but we're applying a lot of what we know about cognition to social environments, to social interactions. So there is somewhat of a tradition of humans being rational beings, but we're not always rational. We do have certain biases, we do take certain shortcuts, especially when it comes to thought processes. Because we only have a limited amount of resources that we can use. We only have so much attention that we can give to our surroundings. And what we perceive, not necessarily what we sense or what is actually occurring in the world, is reality. We are colored by our beliefs, by our expectations of how the world should work, by our own attributes or attributions of how people behave. And not only can we interpret the world very differently than the next person, but we can also interpret the world very differently from moment to moment. So one pretty famous study demonstrated that our motivations can influence how we perceive certain objects or certain stimuli. So participants were brought into a room. They were told that they were going to be flashed something on a screen really quickly, and what was flashed was going to determine whether or not they drank a delicious glass of orange juice or a disgusting concoction made of kale and other disgusting vegetables. And so they were told, all right, this is going to flash on the screen very quickly. If you see a letter, that means you're going to be drinking orange juice. If you see a number, that means you're going to be drinking this disgusting concoction. And what they showed was this image that could be interpreted as the number 13, but could also be interpreted as a letter B, depending on how you look at it. And what the researchers found that when individuals were told that a number signaled the orange juice, people overwhelmingly saw a number. When a letter signaled the orange juice, people overwhelmingly saw a letter. So people use their own motivations to influence their perceptions of the world. The researchers also replicated this with different images. So there's an image that looks, depending on how you look at it, like a seal or a horse's face. And they told participants, all right, the distinction was between if you see a sea animal or if you see a farm animal. And we saw similar results to what I just described. So people are motivated by their biases, by their motivations, and that influences how they perceive and think about the world. And generally, in terms of thinking about others, objects, environments, how the world works, we have two processes that occur, automatic and controlled processing, and this is kind of outlined in what's known as the dual process model. Generally, we can be motivated to behave in certain ways, but more often than not, we simply behave in automatic ways. We don't really think or put too much thought into how we behave on a second-by-second, minute-by-minute basis. The only reason we would kind of spend energy or resources to think about what we're about to do is when we become motivated to. Maybe there's something in our environment, say we're just lounging in the forest, having a great old time. We're not really thinking about what we're doing, we're just enjoying the moment. But if a bear enters the area, then we're motivated to start figuring out, all right, what's my situation? Am I okay? Do I need to get up? Do I need to stay still? How do I survive? These motivations help people react properly, and in certain situations can help people survive. So not only do we need to be motivated, and this can consist of a whole host of motivations, such as self-motivations, maybe wanting to enhance the self, processing motivations, maybe wanting to be accurate in how we're thinking about the world, social-related motivations, maybe we're going to interact with someone in the future, so we want to be sure to have a positive interaction with them now. But we also have to have the capacity to change or think about our behaviors. So sometimes when we're busy doing other things, we can't devote our entire attention to a situation. We don't have the working memory capacity to do this. We might be under what's known as cognitive load. And so we might want to change our behaviors or actively control our behaviors, but we might not be able to. And this is kind of the crux of the dual process model. The idea is that when we perceive something, we typically have an automatic reaction to it that we don't think about, and that leads to how we actually behave in the situation. But sometimes we might be motivated to behave in a certain way. And if we are motivated, we need to have the capacity or ability to change our behavior or control our behavior in order for a conscious reaction to occur, which then will lead to a specific behavior that we perform. So we need both motivation and capacity to control our own behaviors, to have a conscious reaction rather than an automatic reaction. So when we talk about automatic reactions, that's primarily what we're going to be focusing on here when talking about social cognition. There are some important characteristics of what is an automatic behavior, or what is automaticity. And it generally has to have 4 characteristics. It has to be efficient. That means it needs to occur without a whole lot of effort. It has to be unintentional. It has to be uncontrollable, and it has to be outside of awareness. So really, for something automatic to occur, the person needs to be completely oblivious to it, not be thinking about it, not be devoting resources to it, not realize that they're even doing it. So how do some of these automatic reactions form? Well, for the most part, these reactions are driven and created by conditioning through reinforcement and associations, built up over time, reinforced. And we use these automatic reactions to interpret our environment, to interpret other people, specific situations, so on and so forth. So we use different categories that we're aware of to automatically categorize objects that we encounter. So if we see a leaf, we might automatically categorize it as lettuce. We can categorize different situations or scenarios through what are known as schemas. So if we walk into a classroom, we know how to act because we have this association of how we're supposed to behave, or a schema in the classroom. And if we encounter, say, a guy wearing a leather jacket, well, we have stereotypes about people. We know how we should typically react around, or act or behave around, a guy wearing a leather jacket. Maybe talk about sports. That's kind of stereotypically what we're supposed to do. All of these are used to facilitate our interactions with our environment or other people. We can also talk about what's known as the chronicity principle. And that means that we make chronic biases of impressions depending on what we know about an individual. So, for example, if we are to listen to what Dr. Gregory House is saying, well, we know that he's a very sarcastic person, so we're going to assume that pretty much anything he says is sarcastic, and we're going to interpret it that way, whether or not he actually is being sarcastic. Similarly, we may think, all right, Americans are aggressive. So if we encounter an American, we're going to interpret a lot of his behaviors or a lot of his mannerisms as aggressive or as hostile. Additionally, we can see what's known as the recency principle. In this principle, we use recent information to bias our impressions, to bias our understanding of the environment. So, for example, participants asked to read a story about a man named Donald. In the story, Donald raises his voice during an argument, which could be seen as an ambiguous behavior. It could either mean that he's being assertive, trying to get his point across, or it could mean that he's just being a dick or an asshole, just like raising his voice for no apparent reason. How people interpret that behavior, how people perceive that behavior, depends on what type of concepts they were primed with beforehand. So participants who were primed with hostile words tended to perceive Donald's actions as more hostile or more aggressive, whereas people who were primed with neutral words tended to perceive his actions or his speaking up as less aggressive in the other condition. So again, the information that we encounter that could be completely unrelated to the future perceptions can influence our perceptions in one way, shape, or form. And humans are known as cognitive misers. That means we want to conserve mental resources as much as possible. We want to be as efficient as possible. And so we use these little tricks known as heuristics and biases to be as efficient as possible when interacting with the environment. So that's all I have for now. When we come back, we'll start talking about some of these heuristics. Thanks for your time and attention, and I will see you later.